This is Line Break. I'm T.D. Walker. In this episode, we're looking at a few poems from Djuna Barnes, born June 12, 1892 in New York. Though she was most famous for her modernist avant-garde novel Nightwood and for her work as a journalist, Barnes was also a poet, writing lyric poetry and plays in verse, including the antiphon. She was a contemporary of writers Ezra Pound, James Joyce, and T.S. Eliot, who was her editor. Djuna Barnes was glamorous, and like many American and British writers of the 1920s and 1930s, she lived and wrote in Paris before returning to New York. Her work has been called innovative and daring, and we'll see in a moment how her poetry upends expectation. Let's begin with Djuna Barnes' poem, Pastoral. A frog leaps out across the lawn and crouches there, all heavy and alone, and like a blossom, pale and overblown, once more the moon turns dim against the dawn. Crawling across the straggling panoply of little roses, only half in bloom, it strides within that beamed and lofty room, where an ebon stallion looms upon the hay. The stillness moves and seems to grow immense. A shuddering dog starts, dragging at its chain. Thin, dusty rats slink down within the grain, and in the vale the first far bells commence. Here in the dawn, with mournful doom-ed eyes, a cow uprises, moving out to bear a soft-lipped calf, with swarthy birth-swirled hair, and wide, wet mouth, and droll uncertainties. The gray fowls fight for places in the sun. The mushrooms flare and pass like painted fans. All the world is patient in its plans. The seasons move forever one on one. Small birds lie sprawling vaguely in the heat, and wanly pluck at shadows on their breasts. And where the heavy grapevine leans and rests, white butterflies lift up their furry feet. The wheat grows querulous with unseen cats. A fox strides out in anger through the corn, bidding each acre wake and rise to mourn beneath its sharps and through its throaty flats. And so it is, and will be year on year, time in and out of date, and still on time, a billion grapes plunge bleeding into wine, and bursting fall like music on the ear. A snail that marks the girth of night with slime, the lonely adder hissing in the fern, the lizard with its ochre eyes a-burn. Each is before, and each behind its time. We think of pastoral poems as celebrating the landscape, and this one obviously doesn't, which I think puts it squarely within the modernist worldview that we must question what we took for granted because tradition tells us something is so. Let's move now to a couple of poems by Djuna Barnes that still keep us in the landscape. Song in Autumn. The wind comes down before the creeping night, and you, my love, are hid within the green, long grasses, and the dusk steals up between each leaf. As through the shadow, quick with fright, the startled hare leaps up and out of sight. The hedges whisper in their loaded boughs, where warm birds slumber, pressing wing to wing, all pulsing faintly like a muted string, above us where we weary of our vows, and hidden underground the soft moles drowse. And I'd Have You Think of Me by Djuna Barnes. As one who, leaning on the wall, once drew thick blossoms down and hearkened to the hum of heavy bees slow rounding the wet plum, and heard across the fields the patient coo of restless birds bewildered with the dew. As one whose thoughts were mad in painful May, with melancholy eyes turned toward her love, and toward the troubled earth whereunder throve the chilly rye and coming hawthorn spray, with one leaned pacing hound for company. Let's end with one last poem by Djuna Barnes. Call of the Night. Dark and the wind-blurred pines, with the glimmer of light between. Then I, entombed for an hourless night, with the world of things unseen. Mist, the dust of flowers, leagues heavy with the promise of snow, and a beckoning road twixt vale and hill, with the lure that all must know. A light my windows gleam, soft flaring its squares of red. I loose the ache of the wilderness, and long for the fire instead. You too know, old fellow? Then lift your head and bark. It's just the call of the lonesome place, the winds and the housing dark. This has been Line Break. All poems in this episode are in the public domain. To find links to more about Djuna Barnes, as well as to her poems read on this episode, visit my website, tdwalker.net/linebreak.